Now, on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app. O'Connor and Company.
It's 5:07. Good morning. It's Monday in your nation's capital. Way to start off a great week. Is this officially the final week of March? I think it is. Good Lord. It is. It's the last full week of March. We're just charging through this year, almost end of the first quarter, and we're here for it. Coming up a little later in the program at 7:05. Well, it's Monday, and that means Joe DeGenova is going to be here, and we're looking forward to that as always. 8:05, Gary Higgins, a member of the House of Delegates in Virginia, will tell us what happened in this legislative session. And then at 8:35, Christian Toto, film critic, a conservative critic of Hollywood in general. He actually said Snow White wasn't awful. Doesn't matter. No one's seeing it. It could be a great movie. I think people don't want to see it. I kind of wanted to see it. It's Larry O'Connor here this morning alongside Julie Gunlock. Is that weird that I get, you hear a movie is bad. Everything I've seen looks pretty rough.
Well, you're a theater guy. It's understandable.
Movies.
I kind of wanted to see it too.
You learn more from the flops than you do from the successes. That's what I was always told. When you look at something and here's the other thing: the buildup of this is so bad that there's no way this movie can be as bad. It can't live up to the negative hype that it's getting. No. So when you go down and you sit down, you expect it to be bad. It's like, oh well, that wasn't that bad, right?
It's a lesson in how not to act before your movie comes out. I mean, those actors really destroyed that movie.
Yeah. This really, on the face of it also just, we'll have time to talk about this as the morning goes on. But, I mean, the very premise that Gal Gadot has to look in a mirror and have some sort of magic response from that mirror to tell her that she's not as beautiful as Rachel Zegler's. I mean, right there, you've lost me.
Right.
And it's Gal Gadot, for God's sake. All right,
yeah.
So we'll get into all of that a little later in the program. But you're doing well? You had a good weekend?
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Still have some sickness in my house, so I feel like this year's flu season is, and just in general, it's been rough. So I've become the biggest bore. People say, "How are you?" I'm like, "Well, we're sick." And,
everyone's sick. Yes. Everyone's sick. No, but that's reflective of a lot of families around this area. It is actually right now. So yeah. I hope you're all on the mend. At least you got a lot of basketball to watch over the weekend. Right. And congratulations to the Maryland Terrapins, who won on a last-second basket while everyone was watching the clock and watching the shooting motion. They weren't watching the steps because it was obvious traveling in that shot. It's okay. I'm not against Maryland. I'm excited Maryland got in. But, this is what basketball's turned into. We don't call traveling much anymore.
That's right.
The ref was going to call it on the final shot. We have a positive, upbeat story to share with you, although it's also one of those weird, curious stories. I'll cut to the chase. An American who is being held by the Taliban in Afghanistan for 2 years has been released. And his daughter went on Fox News and thanked the Trump administration. We'll share that with you in a moment. This is a great thing. It's a wonderful thing. It makes you feel great, and it makes you happy that the Trump administration came in and really put a focus on getting some of these individuals who have been held overseas as hostages released. We talked about a handful of these stories that we've already learned about, and this one, the story of George Glesman, sort of fits in with a lot of these other stories where there's an overriding narrative arch that we all have to ask each other, which is, why didn't we even know about this? Right. I feel terrible. I'm in the business of doing the news. You're in the business of doing the news and following the news, and I had no idea that this guy was abducted by the Taliban in December of 2022 in Afghanistan. He's been held about 800 days. He was freed after negotiations with the Trump administration, the Taliban. According to the details that have been released, he left Kabul International Airport on March 19th, traveled to Qatar. Apparently the Qataris act as an intermediary on this. And then he made it back home here on March 21st. And Julie, there was nothing said. I never remember anything said by the Biden administration. Joe Biden never went out and said they've got an American in the Taliban, they got to release him. And I can only imagine that the reason that the Biden administration said nothing about this was because they didn't want to draw attention to the disastrous pullout of Afghanistan and a huge foreign policy failure. So instead, we'll just ignore an American who's being held.
Don't forget, also, we didn't know. I remember when Rick Grinnell went down to get those 6 Americans that were stuck in a Venezuelan prison. And we both were like, what did we know about that? No. I didn't know that there were these Americans held captive in Venezuela in a Venezuelan prison. I can't imagine there's a lot of bad prisons in South America. But this seems
that's going to be one of the worst.
This seems to Taliban prison, my God. But this seems to be a thing with the Biden administration. There were hundreds of Americans being kept overseas, and we just didn't know.
Yeah,
we don't know. I wonder how many more we're going to find.
And in countries where there was bad, horrible, disastrous foreign policy, like Venezuela, like Afghanistan, and it just boggles the mind. You wonder how many more. And
That's
here's
right.
This man's daughter. And again, it's a great story, and I don't want to just contextualize it completely in Biden bad, Trump good, but I'll let you listen to the daughter of this American. Again, this is the daughter of George Gleasman. Take a listen.
Do you think that the change in administration, the change in his health, and the change in tactics definitely is the reason why he's home today? More than anything, though, his wife, Alexandra, is the reason he's home today. So I am forever in her debt.
There you go. It's a change in administration, change in strategy, change in tactics. By the way, he was held captive. He was taken in, like I said, December of 2022, which is just a few months after the pullout. And he was traveling in Afghanistan as a tourist. Now, there are plenty of questions that are worthy of being asked. I don't know.
Right.
I don't know who's going to Afghanistan as a tourist to go sightseeing. But he also, if you look at him, he seems like he was an adventurous kind of guy.
Yeah.
And it's not outside the realm of possibility. Or he could have been there because he served in Afghanistan and he wanted to see for himself how bad the pullout was and how bad everything was. Maybe the Biden State Department was, well, listen, we warned everyone not to go there and you take your life into your own hands. And if that's what happens, that's the deal. It could be all of those things. But the bottom line is the Biden administration, number one, was in no position to negotiate and draw any attention to this for political reasons.
Right.
Because they didn't want it to look bad politically for them. And number two, the media blackout on it. Listen, I recognize we're members of the media, but we're not investigative reporters. We're not, in the State Department every day. We're not at the Pentagon every day. We're analysts. We contextualize the story and discuss it here in a talk radio format. It's a different form of the media. The fact that the reporters who were there on the beat on a regular basis either never knew anything about this or possibly even worse, Julie, they knew about it and they never said anything about it is just a bizarre circumstance.
Well, we know that they wanted the Afghanistan issue to go away. It was an embarrassment for the Bidens, so they weren't going to bring any attention to this.
You're right. It's 5:50. Well, we're happy. We're thrilled for Mr. Glesman's family, and we're thrilled that whatever difference it made to have this election go the way that it did so that a new administration could come in and address these things with fresh eyes. We're thrilled that that happened as well. And welcome home to Mr. Glesman and to any American who is still being held captive. We'll pray for you, and we'll try to find out more information.
WMAL, making sense of the news.
Julie, we have another judge who is going out of their way to try to get in the way of the executive branch's obvious duties under Article 2 of the Constitution to run the executive branch and make decisions with regard to policy and how to administer things, especially when it comes to the military. Now, this one has to do with the Pentagon, and it has to do with transgender individuals who are in the military. The Secretary of Defense, along with the Commander-in-Chief, have determined that if you are a transgender individual and you're wearing the uniform for various reasons, because of consistent need for psychological care and psychological administration and oversight, as well as medical concerns, ongoing daily hormone therapy, replacement therapy, and various other medical conditions and medical needs that you may have, all of those things wrapped up into one make you relatively unfit to be able to serve, generally speaking. And so they are requiring people, first of all, who are going through a transition, a gender transition, to get a diagnosis of gender dysphoria, which is shocking to me that you could go through this process without an actual diagnosis in the
Right.
first place, but
Right.
you have to get that diagnosis, and you also are given the opportunity to self remove yourself from the military. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the word that I'm thinking of. Discharge to self-discharge. Anyway, a judge has stepped in on this and said, nope. You got to let them all come in. Got to let them.
This is just unbelievable.
It
love Hegseth's
it doesn't make any
response.
sense at all.
I love Hegseth's response.
What was Hegseth's response?
He says on Twitter, since Judge Reyes is now a top military planner, they can report to Fort Benning at 0600 to instruct our Army Rangers on how to execute high-value target raids. After that, Commander Reyes can dispatch to Fort Bragg to train our Green Berets on counterinsurgency warfare. Well done. I love it.
Yeah, basically the judge is coming in here saying, no, they're fine. They can be soldiers. It's not her job. It's not her job, or they's job, as Secretary Hegseth would say. The judge, this is Judge Anna Reyes, a Biden appointee, also celebrated herself as the first LGBTQ plus judge.
Of course,
which,
yes.
Again, this is one of those things like, listen, whether you're gay or not should make no difference.
Right.
But if you participate in publicity and PR campaigns celebrating your identity, and by the way, it isn't an identity, it's your proclivity, you have same-sex attraction. That does not make you identified as that individual. But if you know what I mean, it doesn't change who you are. It shouldn't, at least. But if she decides to participate in all of this publicity and PR campaign around her same-sex attraction, then maybe it would be wise for her to recuse herself from a story that involves a more activist agenda with regard to that very same thing. But that's basically, she said, and by the way, the reason that she's decided to come in and stop this is not because she believes that, she didn't make the case for troop readiness. She didn't make the case for military effectiveness. She didn't make the case that these soldiers and sailors and Marines are in some way, perfectly suited to fight in combat. No, she said that she blocked the decision because the language in the order was demeaning.
Right.
Judge Reyes should go to boot camp. She should go to plebe summer at the Naval Academy. She should go to OCS to hear some demeaning language now and again. This is outrageous. No matter where you stand on this transgender ban, as they're calling it, you shouldn't be happy that a judge is allowed to step in and interfere with how the military conducts their affairs. That's the biggest problem. We'll talk to Joe DeGenevieve about it coming up at 7:05. Listen, I want to be clear here. And by the way, I've met individuals who wear the uniform and who have gone through whatever process of transgender transition. I just want to make a quick distinction. And if there are psychological needs that inhibit troop readiness, that's an important issue, all right? But that should also be weighed against people who are in the military who also have, PTSD. And do their psychological needs also inhibit them from serving? There should be a standard here, regardless of what the psychological needs are. If you've had major surgery and that surgery requires daily medical attention to maintain whatever change you've made to your body and how you've altered it, I'm sorry, that's a disability. That's something that should not be accommodated. If you've just decided to cross-dress or something for whatever reason and you're going through it, I don't know if that means you should be discharged. This isn't a Corporal Klinger thing necessarily, but it certainly should call into question whether you're ready to serve on a daily basis in combat. Go ahead.
I also just want to remind everyone, and I'm not sure if you remember this, and I was just scrolling through Twitter. Apparently, this is the same judge that cited Hamilton in one of her rulings. Do you remember we talked about that? It's the same judge.
This was in the same ruling. Yes.
Oh, it's the same ruling. I didn't realize.
Yeah,
that.
yeah. The latest development is Hegseth's response to that.
Okay,
And,
interesting.
What this may do, but we'll see. This may be a standoff here because it's pretty clear that this is completely within the executive branch's purview, and the judicial branch, generally speaking, does not try to tread into military decisions that are being made. We'll ask Joe DeGenova at 7:05. Right now, it's 5:23.
Now on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app. O'Connor and Company.
It's 5:36. We're plowing through this Monday morning here in your nation's capital, 24th day of March. Good morning. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for letting us be a part of your morning routine. 7:05, Joe DeGenova will be our guest. At 8:05, Gary Higgins, who's a delegate in the Virginia House of Delegates. And at 8:35, Christian Toto will give us his take on the Snow White debacle, big-time bomb, like H-bomb, like really radical, horrible neutron bomb there. $280 million. I don't know how much they lost completely, but it's bad. Disney's in bad shape. Not
It
good.
is.
Think about running a studio and realizing that you could have taken $250 million, put it into a giant pile, and set it on fire, and it would be the same result, basically, of making a Snow White live-action film.
Dear.
What's that like?
Ugh.
Oof. Anyway, we'll talk to Christian Toto about that. All right, over the weekend, Kash Patel, Julie Gunlock is here, by the way. Good morning, Julie. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Good. We're waking up here. We're getting going. Kash Patel, the director of the FBI, appeared on Fox News, and it was great because, Kash Patel approached this job incredibly as a daunting job to come in and write the shit. Listen, we all wanted a lot done at the FBI. We wanted some of the bad actors, and I believe there are some bad politicized actors at the FBI who utilize their power and their role at the FBI to hurt people politically, to wield their power in an injudicious way against people who would otherwise be considered, normal, innocent Americans. And it's terrifying when you get the knock at the door at the FBI, whether it's January 6th, whether it's parents who went to the school board meetings, whether it's Catholics who went to traditional Latin Mass, whether it was grandmas who prayed outside an abortion mill, whatever it was, the FBI was utilized in a highly partisan political way. One thing they weren't doing, it appeared, was going after the real bad guys. They were utilized basically as a political law enforcement arm. Now, that may not be the reality, but that's certainly what the perception was and what the face of the organization was on a regular basis. And Director Patel wanted to fix that image, and part of that is to go in and do what the FBI is supposed to do, and that is get the bad guys. So here's a little bit from Kash Patel on Fox News explaining that the FBI has done just that. Here's cut 2 first.
Just in the last 3 weeks, Trey, the FBI has arrested and brought to justice, thanks to the Department of Justice and Pam Bondi, 3 top 10 of the FBI's most wanted. Let me just say that again. Not 1, not 2, but 3 of the FBI's most wanted top 10 are now in custody because of our relationships with folks like Director Ratcliffe and Secretary Hegseth and Rubio, and the list goes on. But we've also returned to justice in just one short week's time one of the architects of the Abbey Gate explosion that killed 13 of our service members. We did that in 1 week, flying through multiple countries and going into Pakistan and utilizing our liaison relationships and the leverage that we have, thanks to great guys like Johnny Ratcliffe, and getting a modicum of justice to the American people. And just to put that in perspective, those folks have been on the run for 4 years. And in the last 12 months before I got into this seat, Trey, do you know how many top 10 FBI's most wanted were arrested by the FBI? 0. That's the difference. Yeah. 4 weeks in, we got 3, and we're just warming up.
Yeah, that's pretty great. 3 of the top 10 and 0 in the months leading up to when Kash Patel came in. Did he just call CIA director and former Congressman John Ratcliffe Johnny? Did he call him Johnny Ratcliffe?
It sounds like that.
I guess it is good that they all get along.
Yeah.
That's nice. It's just kind of fun to hear that. He also addressed the question of, a lot has been spoken about the reorganization, but I'd love for somebody to write a really sort of impartial examination and investigation into what happened to the FBI and when it happened. And I've seen some articles about this and some insiders who will talk about it, Julie, And a lot of people point to the Obama administration. Boy, so much happened in those 8 years that, he wasn't lying when he said, that he was going to remake this country and reinvent America, or the fundamental transformation of America. And one of the things that was decided under Robert Mueller, the FBI director, that they would reorient the FBI and centralize so much of what it did. Leading up to that, you had all these field agents and field entities, these offices all around the country. And you had FBI agents who never even came to D.C.
Right.
They never, you had a whole infrastructure that never had anything to do with Washington, D.C. They worked in their local jurisdiction. It was Mueller, I'm told, who sort of centralized the FBI and had hiring decisions all made out of Washington, D.C. And a huge sort of footprint here in Washington rather than out in these satellite areas. And Kash Patel, the new FBI director, spoke to that and spoke to sort of a rethinking of how the FBI interacts in this country. Take a listen.
All right, Director, you've been very intentional about moving agents out of D.C. and back into the field, which is where they really ought to be. Why is that important to you?
What I want to do is highlight for the American public that there's 38,000 employees at the FBI. If you take the national capital region, as the folks around Washington, D.C. call it, the 50-mile radius around Washington, D.C., we have 11,000 employees for the FBI in that 50-mile radius, give or take. And a third of the crime does not happen in this region. A large portion of one of my priorities, fighting violent crime, crushing narco traffickers, stopping fentanyl overdoses, is happening in any town USA across this country. And
all right, pause it there. I don't want to rush through this. This is so important what you just laid out there. 38,000 employees at the FBI, and in a 50-mile radius of D.C., 1/3 of them live here. And what that does to an organization and an entity, and what the focus ends up being if that's the case and where your priorities lie, compared to where the crime actually is when you're a law enforcement agency. I want to go back. We'll go back a little bit so we can listen to this full answer from Kash Patel, and then we'll discuss it, because it is a fundamental change in how the FBI goes about their business, and it will make the biggest difference in the world, and it can be replicated across the executive branch. We'll get into more of it in a moment. It's 5:43.
WMAL, making sense of the headlines, because common sense isn't so common. Download the WMAL app to stream us for free.
And a third of the crime does not happen in this region. A large portion of one of my priorities, fighting violent crime, crushing narco traffickers, stopping fentanyl overdoses, is happening in any town USA across this country. And they need resources in the form not just of money, but manpower. So we're going to reorient our assets in Washington. We're going to look at it strategically, as we've been doing the last month, and send our agents and analysts and SOS operatives into the field to take on this violent crime explosion that has occurred over these last 4 or 5 years, and to make sure that every state and every county, be it in my hometown of Las Vegas, Nevada, or up in Montana or in Kansas or Iowa or Maine, is all safe and secure. And the best way to do that is through a proper show of force with the FBI men and women who do this job so courageously every day out in the streets fighting crime.
It was so great to see Kash Patel get out there. This is his first media appearance. It was on Trey Gowdy's show Sunday Night in America on Fox News. And that's such an important point, Julie, that 38,000 employees, you got 11,000 right here within a 50-mile radius of Washington, D.C. By definition, number one, your hiring base is going to be people from this area, not reflecting the rest of this country in the heartland,
right,
and the perspectives and instincts of those who have lived in a different area, number one. But also, number two, Washington, D.C. lives, dies, eats, drinks, goes to sleep, and wakes up on politics, on federal politics, D.C. politics. And so that's what you're focused on every day when you go to work. That becomes that's how you end up being Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, texting each other while you're having an affair about who the president is going to be. The FBI shouldn't care who the president is going to be. Do your job, go after bad guys. And now Kash Patel is hoping to reorient things and put things back the way it's supposed to be. I love it. And I think other agencies should do the same.
Oh, I agree. And a couple of years ago, I don't know if you recall, there was some thought about moving some members of the U.S. Department of Agriculture to the Midwest. And there was an absolute revolt. I believe it was during the first Trump administration. There was that famous meeting where someone from the Trump administration went to speak to people at USDA about this move, and they turned their backs on him in this sort of moment of defiance, which they just look like spoiled brats. But the idea that the U.S. Department of Agriculture can't move one small office to the Midwest where, you know, they grow things is just absurd. Right. And this centralization of federal agencies in the D.C. area, the immediate D.C. area, it needs to stop. Frankly, there's a lot of talk of like moving the capital. Not that I want to move, but, you know, there's some wisdom to that. D.C., the Acela corridor is completely out of touch with the rest of America.
The Department of Interior should absolutely move west of the Mississippi. The Department of Interior oversees all this. Oh, yeah, to the interior. They oversee all this federal land. Yeah. And the vast, vast majority of this federal land is west of the Mississippi. And yet, by the way, just in terms of cost savings, but also in terms of the personnel. You know, personnel is policy. You always hear that. Personnel is policy. When you're hiring people who are in the swamp, you're going to get a lot of swampy focus in your agency. And they're all going to be influenced by their neighbors and by what's going on in this town. There was a time when our federal capital was located where it was because of proximity issues. You know, listen, there was a lot of politics involved in moving the capital to Washington from New York and deciding it was here. But a big part of it had to do with geographic location, that it was sort of in the center of those brand new 13 states. Wow. And for the first 130, 150 years, it made it a lot easier for people it was sort of centralized location in terms of the East Coast, West Coast. Our population has shifted in this country. And by the way, we all have cars and we have
technology. I'm sorry. We also have Zoom. Yeah. I mean, I think during COVID, we proved that, okay, might have been a little shaky, but things, I mean, I think today people prefer to meet on Zoom. I mean, if I can avoid missing traffic and to stay home and take a meeting, I'd much prefer that to schlepping all the way into DC and trying to find parking. So, you know, spare me this anxiety about remote work.
And by the way, that said, back to the FBI. This is how the FBI was envisioned. Yes, it's a federal law enforcement agency, but their field offices is where the real action takes place. That's where the focus should be. That's what Kash Patel says he wants to do. And let's just go out with his final words here. Cut 3. Kash Patel, FBI Director.
There is no corner on this earth we will not chase down a violent criminal, and there is no sector of the public we will not root out corruption and make sure the American people know what has happened, because that's what they deserve.
It's 5:52.